going on today, YouTube? Rob here. In today's video, I'm coming at you with another deck profile. This is my take on a pretty pure variant of Swordsoul, and I believe this deck is probably one of, if not the best deck in the format so far. And as the format kind of progresses, I might make some changes to it, just to see how things go, but this is the list I've come up with, so I hope you guys enjoy. But before we get started, I just want to say, if you're new to the channel, consider subscribing for more fun Yu-Gi-Oh videos, and without wasting any more of your time, let's get into it. Alright guys, let's get into this Swordsoul deck profile, starting off with our main deck. Kicking things off for our monsters, we have triple copies of Swordsoul Taya. This card lets you banish one Swordsoul card or one worm monster from your graveyard to special summon one Swordsoul token. That is a Worm Tuner Water level 4, attack 0, defense 0. And while this token is in a monster zone, the player who summoned it cannot special summon monsters except Synchro Monsters, so it locks you into Synchro Summoning, as long as that Tuner token is on the field. If this card is sent to the graveyard as a Synchro material, you can send one Swordsoul card or one Worm monster from your deck to the graveyard, and you can only use each effect of Swordsoul of Taya once per turn. Next up, we have triple copies of Swordsoul of Moyet. This card special summons a token if you reveal a Swordsoul card or one Worm monster from your hand, and if this card is used as Synchro materials, you can draw one card. And again, you can only use each effect once per turn. Next up, we have triple copies of Swordsoul Strategist Chanyeng. This card lets you discard one Swordsoul or one other worm monster to special summon this card from your hand, as well as special summoning your token, which again locks you into Synchro Summoning while the token is on the field. And if this card is sent to the graveyard as Synchro material, you can inflict damage to your opponent up to this card's attack, which is 1200. Unfortunately, you can only use each effect of Chanyeng once per turn, because it would actually be really nice to be able to loop your opponent into getting a bunch of burn damage by just continually reviving this card. But at the same time, being able to burn your opponent heading into time is pretty valuable. And that's it for our main Swordsoul monster engine. Next up, we have double copies of Incredible Ecclesia the Virtuous. I would play 3, but right now I don't have access to a third one. This is basically like your Cyber Dragon for the deck. As long as your opponent controls more monsters than you, you can special summon this card from your hand. And you can only special summon Incredible Ecclesia Virtuous once per turn this way. But this card lets you use each of the following effects once. And during your main phase quick effect, you contribute this card and special summon one Swordsoul monster or Fallen of Albaz from your hand or deck. So this card is actually also really good with your Spriggans deck if you built it, because that also implores a lot of Fallen of Albaz cards. And during the end phase, if a fusion monster or monsters was sent to your graveyard this turn, you can add this card from the graveyard to your hand. So that's just really good at being able to have follow-up and extra recursion, because if you are able to fusion summon and then possibly link away, then you can just add this card back to your hand from your graveyard. Next up, let's go into our hand traps. We have double copies of Ghost Bell and Haunted Mansion. This lets you, when a card or effect is activated that includes any of these effects, quick effect, you can discard this card and negate the activation. So if cards are being added from graveyard to hand, deck, and or extra deck, if your opponent special summons a monster or monster cards from the graveyard, or banishing cards from the graveyard, you can only use this effect of Ghost Bell and Haunted Mansion once per turn. And if you haven't already guessed why I'm only playing 2, you'll know pretty soon when we get to our spells. But next up, we have double copies of Ash Blossom and Joyous Spring. So again, when a card or effect is activated that includes any of the following effects. Quick effect, you can discard this card and negate the effect. Adding a card from deck to hand, special summoning from the deck, or sending a card from deck to graveyard. And again, you can only use Ash Blossom and Joyous Spring once per turn. Then we have double copies of Effect Veiler. During your opponent's main phase, quick effect, you can send this card from your hand to the graveyard and target one effect monster your opponent controls, and that face-up monster your opponent controls has its effects negated until the end of this turn. And lastly, for our hand traps, we have double copies of Nibiru, the Primal Being. Again, during your main phase, if you control, or if your opponent normal or special summons 5 or more monsters, this turn, quick effect, you can tribute as many face-up monsters on the field as possible, and if you do special summon this card from your hand, then special summon one Primal Being token, Rock, Light, level 11, attack, defense, to your opponent's side of the field, and this token's attack and defense become the combined original attack and defense of the attributed monsters. You can only use this effect of Nibiru, the Primal Being, once per turn. Next up, for our monsters, I do have a tiny bit of a Tenyi engine. I have Tenyi Spirit Vishuddha. So if you control no effect monsters, you can special summon this card from your hand. And if you control a face-up non-effect monster, you can banish this card from your hand or graveyard, then target one card your opponent controls and return it to the hand. You can only use each effect of Tenyi Spirit Vishuddha once per turn. And I also have the one Tenyi Spirit Adhara, just because it is a tuner, and it is easy enough to be able to special summon, and it is easy enough to just normal summon and be able to go into your synchro plays. So if you control no effect monsters, you can special summon this card from your hand, and if you control a face-up non-effect monster, you can banish this card from your hand or graveyard, then target one of your banished worm monsters except this card and add it to your hand. You can only use each effect of Tenyi Spirit Adhara once per turn. And lastly, for monsters, I am playing the Dragoon package. I would probably prefer in this deck to play the Destroyer Phoenix Enforcer package, but because I don't have access to that, I'm playing Dragoon. I find it is a little bit better than Destroyer Phoenix Enforcer, although Phoenix Enforcer can be a little bit more versatile, I would say. But for now, I'm playing the Red Eyes Dragoon engine, which in and of itself is still really good. And that's it for our monsters. Let's move on to the spells, starting off with Double Crossout Designator. So as you guys may have noticed during my monsters, I am running a bunch of hand traps at 2. This is the main reason. Now, Crossout Designator lets you declare one card name and banish one of that declared cards from your main deck, and if you do, negate its effects, as well as the activated effects and effects on the field of cards with the same original name until the end of this turn. You can only activate one Crossout Designator per turn. This is also a quick play spell, so you could activate it at any time, and always ensure that your combos go through, or just to be able to stop your opponent from really doing anything to interrupt you. Next up, we have 2 copies of Triple Tactics Talent. So if your opponent has activated a monster effect during your main phase this turn, you can activate one of these effects. You can either draw 2 cards, take control of one monster your opponent controls until the end phase, or look at your opponent's hand and choose one card from it and shuffle it into the deck. You can only activate one Triple Tactics Talent per turn. This card is really great as well, because not only does it allow you to get hand knowledge should you choose that, but it also allows you to have the options to dig further into your deck for combo pieces or extenders, and it also allows you to interrupt your opponent by being able to take one of their monsters. So I really like it in this deck. and I find having it at 2 is actually really good as well. Continuing on, we have triple copies of Swordsoul Emergence. This lets you add 1 Swordsoul monster from your deck to your hand, or if you control a Synchro Monster, you can add a Worm monster instead. And if this card is banished, you can target 1 Swordsoul monster or Worm monster you control and increase or decrease its level by 1 until the end of this turn. You can only use each effect of Swordsoul Emergence once per turn. So in effect, this is your mini searcher, and it is also a level modulator to be able to let you go into some rank 7 plays, or not rank 7, level 7 synchro plays. And really, if you wanted to, you could do some other stuff with it as well. Just to be able to, keep your plays going and just have a bit more board presence. Next up, we have triple copies of Sacred Summit. This lets you target 1 Swordsoul monster in your graveyard, or if you control a Synchro monster, you can target a Worm monster instead and special summon it. So this is basically your warrior returning alive. And if this card is banished, again, you can target 1 Swordsoul monster or Worm monster you control and increase or decrease its level by 1 until the end of this turn. You can only use each effect of Swordsoul Sacred Summit once per turn. If you really wanted to, I think you could add some Xyz monsters to this deck, and using your Sacred Summit and Emergence really be able to change the levels so you have a wider variety of ranks that you can go into. But next up, we have Called by the Grave. This is also a card that helps your combos go through. This lets you target 1 monster in your opponent's graveyard and banish it, and if you do until the end of the next turn, its effects are negated, as well as the activated effects and effects on the field of monsters with the same original name. And lastly, for our spells, we have the 1 Red Eyes Fusion to be able to fusion summon our Red Eyes Dragoon. And the reason why I would also rather prefer the Destroyer Phoenix Enforcer is because it doesn't lock you into not being able to special summon anything afterwards, whereas Red Eyes Fusion says you cannot normal or special summon other monsters the turn you activate this effect, and you can only activate it once per turn. So the only real way, if you hard draw this, it's a bit of a neg, but the only real way you can get into this is by using Verte and having its effect copy Red Eyes Fusion, but usually that's at the end of your turn to ensure that you don't need to combo off any further. And that's it for our spells. Let's move on to our traps. So we do have another hand trap, but I put this in our trap section because this is a trap. This is Infinite Impermanence. Again, playing it at 2 for crossout, but this lets you target 1 face-up monster your opponent controls and negate its effects until the end of this turn. Then, if this card was set before activation and is on the field at resolution, for the rest of the turn, any other spell or trap effects in this column are negated. And if you control no cards, you can activate this card from your hand. So again, just really good interruption on your opponent's turn, making sure that their combos don't go through or their plays just don't go through. And lastly, for our main deck, we have double copies of Swordsoul Blackout. This lets you target 1 Worm monster you control and 2 cards your opponent controls and destroy them. Then, if this card was banished, you can special summon 1 Swordsoul token, Worm, Tuner, Water, level 4, attack and defense 0, and while this token is in a monster zone, the player who summoned it cannot special summon monsters from the extra deck except Synchro Monsters. And you can only use each effect of Swordsoul Blackout once per turn. That rounds off our 40 card extra deck. Again, there are a little bit of changes I might make to the deck. I might switch to the Chanyeng variant, but for now, this is actually pretty decent in terms of being able to control the board. And I find it's a little bit safer than the Chanyeng variant, but like I said, I might switch to that as well. But now let's move on to our extra deck. we have 2 copies of Swordsoul Grandmaster Shizao. This requires 1 tuner and 1 or more non-tuner worm monsters. If this card is synchro summoned, you can add to your hand or banish 1 Swordsoul card from your deck. And quick effect, you can banish 1 Swordsoul card or 1 worm monster from your hand or graveyard, then target 1 other effect monster on the field, negate its effects until the end of this turn. You can only use 1 Swordsoul Grandmaster Shizao effect per turn, and only once that turn. So this is actually really good at being able to search your extra pieces, and it's also good to be able to interrupt or negate on your opponent's turn. Then next up we have triple copies of Swordsoul Supreme Sovereign Chanyeng. This is your level 10, which requires 1 tuner and 1 or more non-tuner monster. For each banished card, this card gains 100 attack and defense, and monsters your opponent controls lose 100 attack and defense. If this card would be destroyed by card effect, you can banish 1 card from your graveyard instead, and if a card or cards is banished except during the damage step, you can banish 1 card from both your opponent's field and graveyard. You can only use this effect of Swordsoul Supreme Sovereign Chanyeng once per turn. The great thing about this card is it actually doesn't target. You banish. So this is a decent out to being able to deal with Dragoon, because you're not targeting it, so it is going to be affected by your banish effect. Plus, you can also get rid of any sort of graveyard effects that your opponent might have, and because you're also banishing your own cards and recycling them that way, this card will always gain some extra attack, and your opponent's monsters will always lose extra attack. Next up, we have the 1 copy of Ruddy Rose Dragon. This requires 1 tuner and 1 non-tuner monster. 1 plus non-tuner monsters, I should say. And if this card is synchro summoned, you can banish all cards from the graveyards. Then, if this card was synchro summoned using Black Rose Dragon or a plant synchro monster as material, you can destroy all other cards on the field. When your opponent activates a card effect that would destroy a card or cards, quick effect, you contribute this card, negate the activation, then special summon 1 Black Rose Dragon from your extra deck or graveyard. This card is really great for being able to get rid of problematic cards, and I find it actually works really well with your Swordsoul Tactician, because this is how you get to your level 8s, level 10s, while also applying burn damage. Next up, we have Chao Fang, Phantom of the Yang Zing. This requires 1 tuner plus 1 plus non-tuner monsters. While the synchro summoned card is on the field, your opponent cannot activate effects of monsters with the same original attributes as the Yang Zing monsters used for the synchro summon of this card. When this synchro summoned card is destroyed by battle or card effect and sent to the graveyard, you can add 1 tuner from your deck to your hand. Once per turn, when a monster or monsters your opponent controls is destroyed by battle or card effect, you can special summon 1 worm monster from your deck in defense position, whose original attribute matches the original attribute that one of those destroyed monsters had on the field. So as you guys can see, this is really great with the deck, because not only are you able to, if you had Yang Zing monsters, negate effects of monsters with the same original attributes, but you can also special summon your own worm monsters by destroying your opponent's cards, which I think is really great. Next up, we have 1 copy of Baxia, Brightness of the Yang Zing. This requires 1 tuner and 1 plus non-tuner worm monster. When this card is synchro summoned, you can target 1 card, or you can target cards on the field up to the number of different original attributes of the worm monsters used for this synchro summon of this card. Shuffle them back in the deck. And once per turn, you can target 1 card you control and 1 level 4 or lower monster in your graveyard. Destroy that card on the field, and if you do, special summon that other monster from your graveyard. Again, this has really great synergy with being able to break boards, interrupt your opponent, and also making sure that you have extra follow-up plays by special summoning monsters from your graveyard. Then we have the 1 copy of Risen Dragite, which requires 1 tuner and 1 plus non-tuner monsters. During your main phase, you can excavate the top 5 cards of your deck, and if you do, you can return cards your opponent controls to the hand up to the number of excavated rock monsters. That effect doesn't apply to us because we don't have any rock monsters. And you also place the excavated cards at the bottom of your deck in any order, but that doesn't really matter. The only effect we really need is when your opponent activates a spell or trap or effect while a water monster is in your graveyard. Quick effect, you can negate the activation, and if you do, destroy it. And you can only use each effect of Risen Dragite once per turn. So again, really great synergy with the deck, being able to interrupt your opponent. And lastly, for our Synchro Monsters, we have the 1 copy of Baron de Fleur, which is a generic rank 10, or level 10, sorry, with 1 tuner and 1 or more non-tuner monsters. Once per turn, you can target 1 card on the field and destroy it. And once while face up on the field, when a card or effect is activated, quick effect, you can negate the activation, and if you do, destroy that card. You can only use the previous effect of Baron de Fleur once per turn. And also, once per turn, during the standby phase, you can target 1 level 9 or lower monster in your graveyard and return that card to the extra deck, and if you do, special summon that monster. So again, great synergy with your deck. You're always able to be special summoning or just adding extra monsters to your side of the field. Anyway, that's it for our synchros. Let's move on to the rest of our extra deck, starting off with Lynx and our Predaplant Verte Anaconda. Like I said, this is your secondary way or your main way, depending on how you want to look at it, to be able to go into your Dragoon. This just requires 2 effect monsters, so it's easy enough to be able to get out. And because you are playing Red Eyes Fusion, this is better to go closer to the end of your turn, unless you really don't have anything else that you can do. And nextly, I have 1 copy of Appaloosa, Bow of the Goddess. This requires 2+ monsters with different names except tokens. This is just good to be able to put up extra negates. But this card's original attack becomes 800 times the number of link materials used for this link summon. And once per chain, so not once per turn, when your opponent activates a monster effect, quick effect, you can make this card lose exactly 800 attack, and if you do, negate the activation. So again, just really good for negates and overall control of the board. Then we have the 1 copy of Nightmare Phoenix. This requires 2+ monsters with different names. If this card is link summoned, you can discard 1 card, then target 1 card on the field and return it to the deck. Then, if this card was co-linked while this effect was activated, you can draw 1 card. You can only use this effect of Nightmare Unicorn once per turn. And while any co-linked Nightmare monsters are on the field, for your normal draw, in your draw phase, draw 1 card for each different card name among those co-linked Nightmare monsters, which doesn't really matter because we don't have any other Nightmare monsters. But this is just really good to be able to get some interruptions and negates and just overall flow with the deck. I find it just works really well. Lastly, for our links, we have Access Code Talker, which requires 2+ effect monsters. Your opponent cannot activate cards or effects in response to this card effect's activation. And if this card is link summoned, you can target 1 link monster that was used as material for this link summon of this card, and it gains attack equal to that monster's link rating times 1000. You can banish 1 link monster from your field or graveyard and destroy 1 card your opponent controls. Also, for the rest of this turn, you cannot banish monsters with that same attribute to activate this effect of Access Code Talker. Again, really good at just OTKing your opponent and going for game. And it also just has some pretty good synergy with the deck, and that's why I play it. And lastly, we do have our one fusion monster. This is kind of where Incredible Ecclesia doesn't really work, because how often is Dragoon really going to be sent to your graveyard? But like I said, if I was playing Destroyer Phoenix Enforcer, the Ecclesia effect would be a lot better. You guys already know what this card can do. This card cannot be destroyed by card effects. Neither player can target this card with card effects. And during your main phase, you can destroy one monster your opponent controls, and if you do, inflict damage to your opponent equal to that monster's original attack. You can use this effect a number of times per turn, up to the number of normal monsters used as fusion materials. So that's 2, because we have Red Eyes and Dark Magician. And once per turn, when a card or effect is activated, quick effect, you can discard one card, negate the activation, and if you do, destroy that card. And if you do that, this card gains 1000 attack. Alright guys, that's it for this Swordsoul deck profile. I hope you enjoyed. If you did, be sure to leave a like. Also be sure to comment on what you might want to see next. And if you're not already subscribed to the channel, consider subscribing for more fun Yu-Gi-Oh videos. And as always, I will see you in the next one. That's game.